Next speaker this morning will be the chair of USD 497 Board of Directors, Kelly Jones.
Good morning. So each month of my term as USD 497 board president has brought challenges unimaginable to me when I ran for the board 3 years ago. We are balancing the in-school hybrid and remote learning formats. Not being fully in person has negatively impacted kids, teachers, administrators, and their families' mental health. It may mean that child abuse has gone unreported. There may be widespread learning losses, and we see caregivers having to drop out of the workforce and falling deeper into poverty. We've learned that we can operate schools safely when community spread is under control. In those cases, evidence suggests that schools may not be a vector for the virus, but it presumes that we are prioritizing mitigation approaches like masking, social distancing, and washing hands. In a district our size, we are among the state's larger districts. Adherence to social distancing requires additional staff and space that hopefully will not be a part of Superintendent Lewis's planning equation for the 2021-2022 school year. They have plagued our current school year. So in mid-December, when the news came out that teachers and our K-12 staff were to receive COVID-19 vaccine during the second phase of the state's rollout plan, I felt hope and relief. Even with the vaccine on the horizon, Kansas public schools continue to need additional support for safe and successful operations during the pandemic. We cannot be lulled away from the reality because the vaccine is on the horizon. The USD 497 board urges legislators to consider hold harmless provisions to support school districts through significant and likely temporary financial losses they are experiencing in enrollment, weightings, transportation costs, staffing, and remote learning needs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For periods of remote learning, the board has had to close the digital divide and facilitate access to stable internet and provide necessary technology, which we have had success doing, but not without significant effort, resources, and facilitation. As our representatives, we ask that you advocate for continued expansion of support for universal access to high quality broadband services to support the learning needs of our students and families during and after the pandemic. Routinely, educators share with me that there are aspects of remote learning they'll be using moving forward, even after the pandemic. So closing that digital divide is not a temporary need, it is a permanent one. There are instances where the state requires that districts continue this year as they would in any other year. This can make sense in terms of insisting on rigor and high standard, but there are instances when doing so negatively impacts educational outcomes and pedagogy. We urge the legislature to provide flexibility to districts in areas such as instructional hours so that remote learning options can be structured to support good instructional pedagogy in remote learning environments, and so that we can increase in-person learning, increase teacher plan time, and decrease instances of teachers instructing both the students in front of them and those working from home. Amending instructional hour requirements can be achieved at no cost to the state, and hopefully is something that our legislators will advocate for. I ask that you consider closing the digital divide. And that, when I did that, is an example of an inequity that the pandemic highlights. COVID has negatively impacted all of us, but it has not done so uniformly. Families with historically and currently marginalized identities are suffering worsening educational inequities, economic burdens, chronic stressors, and disparities in health outcomes. These things are exacerbated by school closings or limited access to in-person school. As a board president, I am accountable to that fact. And along with my board colleagues, we endeavor to make sure that all USD 497 students have access to the key resources that lead to better outcomes in schools. We ask that you join us as representatives and advocate for stable, reliable, adequate, and equitable funding of the current school finance formula as approved by the Gannon Court, and encourage the legislature to adopt tax policies that will generate revenue significant to fully fund the school finance formula for current and future generations of Kansas students. We ask that you demand that special education services be fully funded at the required 92% of excess costs, and that you support expanding funding for universal preschool and before and after school programs. We benefit from the guidance and expertise of Dr. Lewis, Dr. Stubblefield, the Lawrence Education Association executive team, the district equity facilitators in the district, and our board and equity committees. They elevate historically marginalized students, staff, and their families. Their dedication is something to see. And if you're watching their work, you can't stop yourself. You raise your hand, you ask, how can I help? And supporting these initiatives are ways that you can do that. A close second to the opportunity gap in the single biggest challenge contest is the critical teacher shortage. Some Kansas districts are placing unqualified teachers in positions that they should not be because they cannot find candidates, particularly within special education. Other districts are seeing small teacher candidate pools get smaller. Recent data coming out of the Kansas Department of Education reports significant increases in vacancies across Kansas. USD 497 HR department does an excellent job of recruiting educators, but at some point, like during the pandemic, the shortage pushes up against Lawrence too. And so we ask the legislator to support recruitment and retention of high quality teachers, administrators, and support staff. We ask that you support a long-term sustained commitment to state funding for CAPERS, including changes to make CAPERS more attractive to retirement programs to support recruitment and retention of high qualified teachers. We also ask that you support reinstating the previous working after retirement laws to allow CAPERS retired staff to continue working without penalty. And finally, many of you will know that I am a licensed mental health worker. This academic year burdens students, teachers, staff, and administrators. My colleague on the board, Carol Kutu-Blackwood, often brings up emotional well-being during COVID. For all staff and students, it's upon the board to allocate resources for evidence-based, culturally and linguistically appropriate trauma-informed school-based mental health services. So we ask that legislators support and advocate for increased support and community partnerships to meet the mental health needs of students and staff. I've heard others echo this, but we would like to see increases in funding for Burn-Nash. And additionally, we would like you to support increased funding for school and community-based mental health services that include additional school counselors, social workers, and psychologists. So my great thank you to our representatives. I know that you have our back, and it makes my job much easier. And to Representative Haswood, welcome. I look forward to seeing what you do this year.